But the question then sort of becomes why?
Yeah.
Right? Because the reality is that this has been a blessing for our communities. It's been a blessing, and it's something that we've seen and that is so good that it's worth continuing to pursue long after pandemic's over. So for you, what have been some of the whys that, because there are things that you have to navigate, we've got to talk through things, you sort of got to lay down stuff and say, in order for us to go together, we've got to figure these things out. So what are some of the whys for you that have been so, like, marked this time?
Well, for me, I mean, just practically speaking, our church has always had a very small staff. And the staff that I do have, they have other jobs.
Yeah.
And so to have a team of people to share ideas with, in addition to the leaders that I have, is huge. To have folks to share the load with is huge. To have strengths that I don't have represented in our own community that might be represented in your church, to have access to that it's a game changer for a church. And so I'd like to believe that went both ways. You know, that even though we had a smaller staff, we had some strengths that maybe you didn't have access to that we could share. And I don't think that's just something for pandemic. I think that's something for always. Like that's just the way life should be. That's the way we should be operating all the time.
I agree. And I also think, like, I mean, for us, it's also seeing what's going on through different eyes and a different perspective.
Right.
Because I think we can get caught in the minutia of what we're doing, and we get really locked in, and we can't see it from a different angle. And sharing with somebody else who maybe has a different perspective that actually opens us up to the possibility of what can be.
Right.
Or say it's not. Maybe that's not as complicated as I think it is. The other thing I think, which is really important, is like just the stewardship of our resources. Yeah. So the fact that we can share this, as an example, I mean, as kids are doing their videos, and it's like, well, we need to edit these. Mm-hmm. And so how do we steward our resources? Well, if you're doing your own videos and we're doing our own videos and we're paying to get them edited, I mean, or but if we're doing these together and we're able to bring in somebody that not only will provide the income for the skills required and the work done in editing, it's a shared load.
Right.
Which makes it so much more accessible to do things that we couldn't otherwise think about. Yeah. So in a kingdom perspective, it just makes, on stewardship level, it makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
That's like one of the big whys for me, is like, it makes zero sense that we're doubling our efforts for the same result. Yeah. And if we're thinking about it from that.
And in just a few months, we've already seen that work out in children, in youth, in worship, in tech. I mean, who knows where else it'll go. So.
And I think like the places it can go are pretty exciting. Yeah. Because if you begin to think, okay, if it works here, it can work here. If it can work here, it can work there. Right. I think the other thing for me is that it's culturally disruptive.
Right.
So not only to just the way our world works, but the reality is the way often the church world works, where we're sort of marked our territory, we're territorial, this is ours, and there's almost a little bit of competition, but we're all in the vineyard, so that's fine. But we also have this reality that can be really beautiful in the vineyard, that some people are in one vineyard and they move, and now they're in this one over here, or the season of life changes, and so and instead of it becoming this awkward thing of like, oh no, how do we deal with these things? We get to fully embrace and say, this is God's church, this is His church, we're His people, and because we choose to work together, it actually is disruptive to that cultural norm of like, we're divided, we're segmented, we're possessive, and we get to say, that's what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 15 years ago, I might have been real nervous, like, man, if Josh really gives an incredible message that just changes people's lives, what if they decide it's worth driving 30 minutes to go listen to him instead of me? And I was there at some seasons, but I haven't felt, one bit of that at all. All I felt is, a sense of partnership and being on the same team with the same goals, with the same intentions. And honestly, it feels like our reach is that much greater. I mean, if that were to happen, nobody get any ideas, but if that were to happen, that's a win. That's a win, because that just allows that person to flourish even more than maybe they already are. And so it's exciting when you think about it that way.
It is exciting, and I think it allows for us to understand that that the church we should be about a move of God for our city,
right,
more than we are about how do we become something of significance. We were talking a little bit earlier, I keep coming back to this idea that instead of us being a church in our area, when we talk about the Vineyard, what if we operated from a mentality of we are an area church? So like this is like, yes, we are the Houston Vineyard. Yes, you are Trinity. But what if our mentality was that is secondary to the fact that we are an area church, which is secondary to the fact that we are the church, like part of the church.
Yeah.
And so if we held those things loosely and sort of leaned into the relationship, it creates this ability for us to sort of redefine community beyond our four walls.
Right.
And that sort of, I think, for me, it allows us to like sort of look at the bigness of God in a new way.
Yeah.
And so that's been a ton of fun.
Yeah. And as big as Houston is, I mean, there's no way our church can reach the various parts of Houston in an effective way. But the truth is, our people are connected in some way to the various parts of Houston. So I have people that work on the other side of town, an hour away, that have relationships with coworkers that live in that part of town, that we need to have the area mentality so that maybe that coworker might discover Jesus in a local church in that part of the city. That's an area mentality. And I don't think we have a choice. We have to do that.
I think we have to. I think if we think about some of the gifts in pandemic, that's one of it. I think hopefully we've been disillusioned from this idea that we somehow have to do it all alone, and that we are even capable of. I think we've been reminded in isolation, in sort of the craziness of not knowing what's going on, that we're created for community. And if we're following Jesus, we're created not only for community, but we're created for unity. And not in the sense of that we all believe the same thing about everything and that we all go to the same church, and we're created for the thing is that we lay down everything else at the foot of the cross and say the person and work of Jesus is the central figure.
Right.
And if we can do that, then we can maintain unity and be a loving example to a world around us that otherwise we wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, the world's watching to see how churches are responding. You know, the church has been a good example, but it's also been a bad example. And I think one of the ways we can shine is to show partnership with one another. I mean, people are looking for that. The world is so defensive. Their posture is so defensive to one another. And if we can demonstrate two individual churches coming together for a common cause and purpose, I'd like to believe that sends a message about who God is and how he wants us all to come together to be a part of what he's doing here on earth. So.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where as our hearts are pointed in that direction, in community and relationship and co-laboring together, it also keeps our heart pointed to generosity. Yeah. And generosity is one of those things that as we operate in it, it opens up more in us for generosity. It keeps our heart pointed towards humility. You know, and there is some of those things. There is some of those things of like we do a video and it's like, man, that mic guy, I could really, that human element of, hey, how'd it go this Sunday? Oh, we had 1 million people show up. It's like, oh man, like all those insecurities that could come back, we are pointing towards humility where we're understanding that we're in this together. Yeah. And we're actually not in competition. No. And it's not about what happens to you or to me or to the church. It's what happens for the kingdom of God as a whole. And
like an example of that is this next Sunday. I'm not sure if you know this, but Matt, the guy that does running the camera right now, that does all of our tech, I guess, is going to jump in here to kind of help provide some support. Yeah. And for me, this is another piece of generosity. It ups the reason for both of us to replicate our leaders so we can share our leaders. So Matt wouldn't be able to come here if I didn't have a James back home that could run things when Matt was gone. Yeah. So in order to be generous, we have to. It gives us not just this relationship where Josh bail me out. It gives us a relationship where I want to multiply leaders so I can help serve our area, support other churches, bring expertise to other communities that we have that others don't.
So. And it opens up this really beautiful thing where we, instead of looking at who fits in the hierarchy of the Vineyard churches in the Houston area, we get to look at and really identify what people are really good at and ask for help. Yeah. So it could be like the biggest, I don't know whatever the biggest vineyard is in Houston, asking the smallest one, hey, you guys are really good at this. Could you send some help? Yeah. And so it really, again, I think the posture of humility where we're like, hey, we're team players in that. It also allows us to celebrate each other's wins. Right. So for example, when the freeze happens and I get a video from you that shows a lazy river going through and going, okay, we're here, and you going, okay, we're good. But then to be able to see the provision of God through the faithfulness of insurance, which is never,
Praise God,
it's not always
Right.
it's a little bit sketchy sometimes going, is this gonna, but also sort of to celebrate with you the win of seeing an auditorium actually transform to be more aligned with who you are as a community and where God's taking you. We get to look and say, this is amazing.
Yeah.
But
part of our insurance was you. Part of our insurance was the relationships we have in the Vineyard in our area and other churches, that I know that if that lasted longer than 3 months, if that was going to be a 1 year long process of rebuilding or whatever it might have, I knew that there was partners there that were going to walk with us through it.
And that's huge. I mean, it is. And it goes back again to the relationship aspect of this. It's like, that is the key of this. I mean, partnership is great, but without the relational sort of connection, it sort of falls apart. So as we look at it, because when we start to lay it out, it's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of risk, because every one of these is a risk. Like every time you say, hey, let's do this together, there's a risk. There's a lot of like turning back towards each other and saying, hey, are you okay? Yes. Are you okay? Yes. All right. This weird thing happened. Should we talk about it? Yeah, let's talk about that. These people that were in your church are now at my church. Can we talk about that?
Right.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What do you think? I'm super excited.
Yeah.
Super excited that they're there, because I want people to be where they're growing in relationship with God and others that's in a way that transforms their lives. And if that can't be here right now, I'm glad there was somebody that I know, that I love, that I trust, that I know will care for them. And, so it's that leaning in to navigate it. We'll continue to do that.
I hope so.
Right?
Yes, let's.
Yeah,
let's plan on it.
Every once in a while, jeez. No. But what else does it look like?
Well, I mean, the thing I can't help but think is, as we're sharing, who might listen to this conversation, and this is a partnership, but this isn't an exclusive partnership.
No.
There's other people invited to the table, and there already have been. And so there's plans now for us to partner with 2 other churches in the area with an Advent series, and this isn't just a Houston Trinity thing.
As much as we would like to be the cool kids at the table,
exactly.
That whole humility and leaning in, we've sort of got to do this as a whole.
This has got to be more than that. It has to be more of a movement, more of a whole mentality and approach. And so I think that's significant. We have a lot more stories to share that our 2 churches partner together. Let's hope if we do this a year from now, there's a lot more sharing that involve other communities and churches in the area.
And there's already plans for that. And so we're talking, like you said, with 2 other to look at Advent, for example, this coming year, and say, is there a practical in a way we could do Advent together,
right?
That connects us in a way that doing it alone would never replicate. We're looking at doing another worship night with several other churches. This one won't be in Trinity or in the Houston Vineyard. We're going to do it somewhere else, which is going to be great. I'll tell you what, as I look forward, I'm excited about what I think it means for the city. Because I run back to like in Jeremiah 29, where God's talking to these essentially refugees in a city, and he says, like, you need to build your lives, and he says, but you need to pursue the blessing of the city, because its blessing is for your benefit. And I think about, like, if we really want to pursue the blessing of our city, it's got to be locked in arm to arm with other people that are pursuing the blessing of the city. So I actually am excited about not only what it means for us as area vineyards as we begin to continue this, because the relational framework for us to work together is pretty firmly set with all of us.
Right.
Like, we've been leaning in for the last 3 years essentially to really developing those relationships, because we have to be able to trust each other, communicate, all those things. That's been sort of baked in at this point. And so now the next thing is like taking the risks for how do we do these different things together. Yeah. I'm excited about what it means also as we can look at partnership outside of the Vineyard for other churches. That's right. Like maybe even thinking, I think through our desire as a community to be a blessing for the most vulnerable in our city, and going, but if Houston Vineyard does its own thing for the most vulnerable in the city, our impact is this. Yeah. And again, the stewardship question, the cost of that impact is this. What if it was in partnership? Yeah. What if it was the local vineyards in an area combined with this other group of people that are doing amazing stuff, and the cost for us is still this, but the impact is this. And so as I look at it too, I'm going, man, it's exciting. It is, for me, it's been a gift in the pandemic, because the pandemic has sort of left us go, if we try to do this alone, we're going to do it poorly, and we're going to probably lose ourselves in it. You're exceptional in every way. That's been
I'm with you.
My experience at times was like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this personally. How do I do this? And so the only thing I could think of is, as long as we're not, as a church, not doing this alone, then I think we can make it.
Yeah.